I wasn't going to tell this story, but I can't stop thinking about it. A 3-year-old girl picked up a phone, dialed a number she wasn't supposed to know, and said 7 words that brought a billionaire to his knees in his own kitchen. Nobody in that mansion saw it coming. Not the fiancée in her golden dress. Not the staff standing frozen by the marble counters. Not even the little girl's own mother, who had spent months hiding her pain to protect her daughter. What happened next changed 4 lives forever. And by the end of this story, I think it might change how you see the people who quietly work in the background of our lives too. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I really do read every single one. Today's story is one of the most emotional ones we've ever told here. It's about love, class, cruelty, and a child's fearless heart. It's about a maid who endured more than anyone should ever have to endure, and a little girl who refused to stay silent. I promise you this one will stay with you. Let's get into it. She scrubbed the marble floors on her knees, but she never once let her daughter see her cry. Her name was Danielle. She was 29 years old, and for the last year, she had worked as a live-in maid in one of the most beautiful homes in Greenwich, Connecticut, a glass and stone mansion that sat on 11 acres of manicured land, owned by a man named Nathaniel Cross. Nathaniel was 33. He'd built a tech company from a college dorm room and turned it into a billion-dollar empire by the time he was 30. He was the kind of man magazines loved to write about. Sharp jaw, quiet confidence, the type who worked 18-hour days and still remembered his housekeeper's birthday. People assumed a man like that would have everything figured out. He didn't. Not the part that mattered most. Danielle hadn't planned on becoming a maid. 3 years ago, she'd been a kindergarten teacher in Ohio, married to a man who promised her forever and then vanished the day she told him she was pregnant. She raised her daughter, Emma, alone for the first year, working 2 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, until her aunt in Connecticut told her about a housekeeping position with good pay and, more importantly, housing included. She took it without hesitation. A roof over Emma's head. Food on the table. She told herself it was temporary, just until she saved enough to go back to school, back to teaching, back to the life she'd planned. She didn't know it would come with a different kind of hardship. One that had nothing to do with scrubbing floors or ironing shirts. That hardship had a name, Victoria. Victoria Lane was 31, stunning, and engaged to Nathaniel for the past 8 months. She came from old money, the kind of family that measured people by their last names and their zip codes. To Victoria, Danielle wasn't a person. She was furniture that happened to move and occasionally disappoint her. Started small. A folded towel that wasn't folded the right way. A vase moved 2 inches to the left. Victoria would sigh dramatically, roll her eyes, mutter under her breath just loud enough for Danielle to hear. Then it grew. Victoria began finding reasons to humiliate her in front of guests, asking her to reserve a dish because it smelled poor, criticizing her uniform, calling her the help instead of her name, even when Nathaniel was in the room. And Nathaniel, brilliant, driven, endlessly busy Nathaniel, noticed almost none of it. He worked from before sunrise until long after dinner. When he was home, he was on calls in his office, buried in spreadsheets and board meetings. He liked Victoria's confidence, her polish, the way she fit so effortlessly into the world he'd built for himself. He had no idea that the woman he was about to marry was quietly destroying someone in his own house. Danielle never said a word. Not because she was weak, because she had Emma to think about. If she lost this job, she lost the roof over her daughter's head. So she swallowed every insult. She stayed late without complaint. She smiled when Victoria snapped at her in front of dinner guests, and she cried quietly in the laundry room afterward, where no one could hear her. Emma, though, sweet, curious 3-year-old Emma, saw more than anyone realized. Children notice everything. They notice tone of voice. They notice when mommy's hands shake while folding towels. They notice when a grown woman in a gold dress makes their mother's eyes go glassy and far away. Emma didn't understand the words Victoria used, but she understood the feeling behind them. And little by little, something was building in that small, fearless heart of hers, something none of the adults in that house were prepared for. One evening, Danielle was pouring wine for guests at a dinner party when Victoria accidentally bumped her arm, sending red wine splashing across a $12,000 tablecloth. In front of 15 guests, Victoria turned to Danielle with a look of pure theater and said, "You clumsy, careless girl. Do you have any idea what that costs? Clean it up. Now." The room went quiet. Danielle's face burned with humiliation as she dropped to her knees, dabbing at the stain with a napkin, murmuring apologies to a mess she never made. Nathaniel, seated at the head of the table, glanced over, just for a second, but a business associate asked him a question, and his attention slipped away again. Emma was sitting on the staircase in her red dress, watching through the railing. She saw her mother on her knees. She saw the tears her mother tried to blink away. And something in her small chest tightened. She didn't cry. She didn't run to her mother. She simply turned quietly and walked back up the stairs to the guest room where she'd been playing, the room with the phone charging on the nightstand. A phone Danielle had once shown her how to use. "Just in case of emergency, sweetheart, in case you ever need to call mommy." Emma remembered one more thing Danielle had told her, almost as a joke, weeks earlier. A number she'd made her memorize, just in case. Mr. Nathaniel's number, for real emergencies only. Emma picked up the phone. Nobody knew a 3-year-old had just done something that would shake the entire house to its foundation. Nathaniel's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket while he was still at the dinner table, half listening to his business partner discuss quarterly earnings. He almost ignored it, until he saw the caller ID. Emma. A name that made him pause because he genuinely liked that little girl. She used to wave at him shyly from the hallway, sometimes leaving crayon drawings under his office door. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway to answer. "Emma. Sweetheart, is everything okay?" There was a pause. Then a small, serious voice said, "Mr. Nathaniel, my mommy is crying again. The pretty lady made her cry. She always makes her cry. Please come see." Nathaniel froze. "What do you mean, always?" "Every day," Emma said simply, the way only a child can say something devastating without knowing its weight. "Mommy cries every day in the laundry room. She thinks I don't know. But I know." The call ended. Emma, satisfied she delivered her message, hung up and went back to her coloring book, as if she hadn't just cracked open a secret her mother had spent a year trying to bury. Nathaniel stood in the hallway holding his phone, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. He thought of the wine incident 20 minutes earlier. Danielle on her knees, Victoria's cold voice, the way he'd glanced over and then looked away, distracted, unbothered. He thought about a dozen other small moments he'd brushed past. The way Danielle's smile never quite reached her eyes anymore. The way she flinched slightly whenever Victoria entered a room. He walked back into the dining room, but he didn't sit down. He stood at the head of the table, looking at Victoria, who was laughing with a guest as if the tablecloth incident had never happened. "Excuse me for one moment," he said to his guests, voice tight and calm. "I need to check on something." He walked through the house, past the kitchen, past the dining hall, until he found the laundry room. And there she was, Danielle, sitting on an overturned bucket, wine-stained napkin still in her hand, wiping her face with her sleeve, trying to compose herself before she had to go back out and face another round of humiliation. She looked up, startled, when he appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Cross, I'm sorry, I was just—" "Danielle." His voice cracked slightly. "How long has this been happening?" She blinked, confused, then defensive, then afraid. "I don't know what you mean, sir. Emma called me." He said it gently, watching her face fall completely. "She told me you cry every day. She told me Victoria makes you cry every day." Danielle's composure shattered. Months of silence, of swallowed anger, of forced smiles came pouring out in a wave she couldn't stop. She told him everything. The humiliations at dinner parties, the insults when he wasn't around, the threats that she'd be fired if she ever complained, the fear that kept her mouth shut for the sake of her daughter's home and safety. Nathaniel listened, standing in that laundry room in his tailored suit, feeling something inside him crack open. He thought about how hard he'd worked to build a life, a company, a legacy, and how blind he'd been to the cruelty happening right under his own roof, to a woman who worked herself to exhaustion every single day to give her daughter a chance at something better. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. Danielle looked at him with tired, honest eyes. "Because people like me don't get believed over people like her, Mr. Cross. Not ever." Those words hit him harder than anything Victoria had ever said at a board meeting, harder than any failed deal or missed quarter. He realized, standing there, that he had built an empire out there in the world, but inside his own house, he'd let something rotten grow, and he hadn't even noticed. "That's going to change," he said. "Tonight." He walked back into the dining room. The guests were still laughing, still sipping wine, utterly unaware that the foundation of the evening was about to collapse. Victoria looked up at him, smiling that practiced, polished smile. "There you are, darling. Everything all right?" Nathaniel didn't smile back. "Victoria, we need to talk. Now." Something in his voice made the whole table go quiet. Victoria's smile faltered, just slightly, like a crack forming in expensive glass. Nobody at that table was ready for what Nathaniel said next, least of all Victoria. "Excuse us for a moment," Nathaniel said to the guests, his tone leaving no room for argument. Victoria rose from her chair, confusion flickering across her face, and followed him into the study, heels clicking against the marble floor. The moment the door closed, Nathaniel turned to her, his jaw tight. "Danielle has worked for us for over a year. In that time, how many times have you humiliated her in front of guests?" Victoria blinked, caught off guard. "What? Nathaniel, what is this about?" "She's a maid. I don't understand why." "She's a human being," Nathaniel said sharply, cutting her off. "And she's been crying in the laundry room. Every day, Victoria. For months. Do you know why I know that? Because a 3-year-old girl called me tonight to tell me her mother was hurting, because no adult in this house was paying attention. A toddler had to do what the rest of us failed to do." Victoria's face shifted through several expressions. Confusion, embarrassment, and then something colder. "Oh, please. She's being dramatic. I've barely said 2 words to that woman." "That's a lie," Nathaniel said quietly. "And I think you know it." He told her everything Danielle had shared. The insults, the constant belittling, the threats about her job, the tablecloth incident just 20 minutes earlier that Victoria herself had orchestrated by, accidentally, spilling the wine and blaming an innocent woman in front of 15 people. For the first time since he'd met her, Nathaniel really looked at Victoria. Not the polished exterior, not the effortless elegance that had once dazzled him, but the coldness underneath it. He thought about all the small comments he'd dismissed as jokes, all the time she'd made snide remarks about people like that over dinner, all the moments he'd laughed along because he hadn't wanted to make waves. "I want you to apologize to her," he said. "Tonight. In front of the staff, since that's where you chose to humiliate her. Victoria's eyes flashed with disbelief. You want me to apologize to the maid? Nathaniel, listen to yourself. You're a cross. Elaine. We don't apologize to staff, we. That sentence right there, Nathaniel said, his voice dangerously calm, tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. Victoria's carefully constructed composure finally cracked completely. You're really going to throw away everything? Our engagement, the wedding, everything we've built, over a maid and her kid? And there it was. The moment Nathaniel would later describe as the exact second everything became clear. Not anger. Not confusion. Clarity. You just called a 3-year-old her kid like she's an inconvenience, he said slowly. That little girl called me tonight because she loves her mother enough to break the rules to protect her. She's braver than most adults I know. And you can't even bring yourself to call her a name. He walked to the study door and opened it. The engagement is over, Victoria. I'll have my lawyer draft the necessary paperwork. I think it's best if you stay somewhere else tonight. Victoria stood frozen for a moment, disbelief washing over her features, before fury replaced it. You'll regret this, Nathaniel. Everyone will hear about this. I'll make sure of it. Let them hear it, he said simply. Let them hear that a billionaire finally learned something important from a maid's daughter. Victoria stormed out of the study, grabbing her purse from the front hall, her heels echoing sharply against the marble as she left the mansion, and unknowingly left behind the biggest financial and social opportunity of her life over a decision she never thought she'd have to make: choose cruelty or choose to change. She chose neither. She simply left. Nathaniel stood alone in the quiet study for a long moment, catching his breath, feeling the full weight of what had just happened. Then he walked back toward the kitchen, toward the laundry room, toward the woman whose daughter had just changed everything. He found Danielle standing near the staircase, holding Emma, who had wandered down looking for her mother. Emma's small arms were wrapped tightly around Danielle's neck, and when she saw Nathaniel approaching, she peeked over her mother's shoulder with wide, curious eyes. "Hi, Mr. Nathaniel," she said softly, as if she hadn't just appended an entire household in one phone call. Nathaniel crouched down to her eye level, his throat tight with emotion he wasn't used to showing. "Hi, Emma. You did something very brave tonight. Do you know that?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Mommy says brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared." Nathaniel looked up at Danielle, whose eyes were filled with tears again, but this time they weren't tears of pain. What Nathaniel did next surprised even the household staff who had worked for him for years. The dinner guests had long since left, whispering to each other about the strange tension they'd sensed but hadn't understood. The mansion was quiet now, save for the soft hum of the dishwasher and the low murmur of Nathaniel's voice as he sat with Danielle in the kitchen, Emma curled up asleep in her mother's lap. "I owe you an apology," Nathaniel said. "Not just for tonight. For every day I didn't notice. I was so focused on building something bigger out there, that I let something ugly grow right here in my own home. That's on me, Danielle. Not you." Danielle wiped her eyes, still stunned by how quickly the night had turned. "You don't owe me anything, Mr. Cross. You didn't do anything wrong." "I did," he said firmly. "I hired someone to be my partner in life without truly knowing her character. I let her treat you the way she did because I was too distracted to see it. A good man pays attention to the people around him, not just the people in the boardroom. I forgot that. Your daughter reminded me." He glanced down at Emma, her curly hair falling across her face as she slept peacefully, utterly unaware that her small act of courage had reshaped the course of several adult lives in a single evening. "I want to make things right," Nathaniel continued. Not out of guilt. Out of respect. You've been raising your daughter alone, working yourself exhausted, enduring something no one should endure. And you never once complained, never once made a scene, never once asked for anything beyond what was fair. That says more about your character than anything Victoria ever showed me in 8 months. Danielle didn't know what to say. She'd spent so long being invisible in this house that kindness, real kindness, felt almost foreign. Over the next few weeks, things changed in ways Danielle never expected. Nathaniel didn't just apologize. He acted. He gave her a substantial raise, one that finally allowed her to save real money for the first time in years. He offered to help cover the cost of her returning to school to finish her teaching credentials, something she'd given up on the day her ex-husband walked out. He made sure the rest of the household staff treated her with the respect she'd always deserved but rarely received. But it wasn't the money or the opportunities that moved Danielle the most. It was the small things. Nathaniel started remembering Emma's favorite snacks. He'd leave a coloring book on the kitchen table, just because. He began asking Danielle about her day, really asking and really listening, something Victoria had never once bothered to do in over a year. Word about the broken engagement spread quickly through Nathaniel's social circle, just as Victoria had promised it would. People whispered, some judged him, some assumed there was scandal involved. But when the true story slowly emerged, not through gossip, but through the quiet testimony of household staff who'd witnessed the cruelty firsthand, the narrative shifted. People began to see Nathaniel not as a man who'd thrown away a perfect match, but as a man who'd finally seen clearly. Victoria, for her part, tried everything to salvage the situation. She called. She sent letters. She even showed up at his office once, demanding a second chance, insisting she'd learned her lesson. But Nathaniel remained firm. Some lessons, he'd realized, shouldn't need a toddler's phone call to teach them. If Victoria's character had to be forced into decency, it wasn't real decency at all. Months passed. Danielle enrolled in an online teaching certification program, studying late at night after Emma went to sleep, determined to give her daughter the stable, joyful life she'd always dreamed of. Nathaniel, without any expectation of anything in return, quietly became something like family to them, checking on Emma's daycare, sitting through Danielle's practice teaching presentations, celebrating small wins that most people wouldn't even notice. One evening, nearly 6 months after that fateful dinner party, Nathaniel sat on the living room floor, helping Emma build an elaborate tower of wooden blocks while Danielle studied at the kitchen table nearby. Emma knocked the tower down with a triumphant giggle and looked up at Nathaniel with the same fearless, wide-eyed honesty she'd had the night she picked up that phone. "Mr. Nathaniel," she said, "are you gonna marry my mommy?" The room went still. Danielle's pen stopped moving across her notebook. Nathaniel felt his face flush, caught completely off guard by the bluntness only a child could deliver. Emma, that's not really something we. Because I think you should," Emma continued matter-of-factly, stacking another block. "You make her laugh. She doesn't cry anymore. And you're nice to me too." Danielle finally looked up, her cheeks pink, meeting Nathaniel's eyes across the room in a moment neither of them had planned for. Neither of them had expected, but neither of them denied. Nobody in that house that night could have predicted where this story would truly end. Nathaniel didn't answer Emma's question directly that evening. He simply smiled, ruffled her curly hair, and helped her rebuild her block tower, while Danielle quietly returned to her studies, her heart pounding in a way she hadn't felt in years. But something had shifted between them, something neither of them rushed, neither of them forced, but something both of them quietly, carefully allowed to grow. Over the following year, their relationship changed slowly and naturally. Nathaniel never treated Danielle as an employee again. In fact, the moment she finished her teaching certification, he made sure she had every opportunity to leave housekeeping behind entirely and step into the career she'd once given up on. She began teaching kindergarten at a local elementary school, the same job she'd loved and lost years earlier, only this time with a support system behind her that she'd never had before. Nathaniel didn't do this to win her over. He did it because it was the right thing to do, and somewhere along the way, doing the right thing had become inseparable from wanting to be near her. Their relationship grew out of respect first, friendship second, and love, quietly, somewhere in between. Never rushed, never performative, nothing like the polished, hollow engagement he'd once had with Victoria. 2 years after that dinner party, Nathaniel proposed to Danielle. Not in a ballroom full of guests, not with cameras or headlines, but in their own backyard, with Emma standing beside them holding a small bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked herself that morning. When Nathaniel got down on one knee, Emma, now 5 years old, clapped her hands and shouted, "I knew it! I told you so!" Loud enough for the neighbors to hear, making both adults burst into laughter through their tears. Danielle said yes. Not because it solved her financial struggles, not because it changed her social status. Those things had already changed on their own through her own hard work. She said yes because for the first time since her daughter was born, she'd found someone who saw her, truly saw her, not as staff, not as an obligation, but as a whole person worthy of love and respect. At their wedding, held on the same grounds where Danielle had once scrubbed floors on her knees, Nathaniel gave a toast that surprised everyone in attendance. He didn't talk about his company, his success, or his wealth. He talked about a phone call from a 3-year-old girl who had more courage than most adults he'd ever met in the boardroom. "My daughter," he said, looking down at Emma, who beamed with pride at being called that for the first time publicly, "taught me the most important lesson of my entire life. She taught me that love isn't loud speeches or grand gestures. It's paying attention. It's noticing the people who quietly hold everything together, even when the world overlooks them. I built a company by paying attention to numbers and trends. But it took a toddler to teach me to pay attention to the people I actually loved." There wasn't a dry eye in that backyard. Danielle went on to become one of the most beloved teachers at her school, known for her patience, her warmth, and her quiet strength. The same strength that had carried her through the hardest year of her life. Emma grew up knowing deep in her bones that her voice mattered, that speaking up for the people she loved was never something to be ashamed of, no matter how small she was or how big the person on the other end of the phone happened to be. And Victoria. She eventually moved on, married into another wealthy family, and continued living the life she believed she was entitled to. But those who knew the real story never forgot what kind of person she truly was underneath the designer dresses and polished smiles, and more importantly, neither did Nathaniel, who built the rest of his life making sure he never again mistook cruelty for confidence, or silence for weakness. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's this. Kindness doesn't need power to make a difference, and courage doesn't need age to matter. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one that changes everything, not because it's the loudest, but because it comes from the purest place. Love. If this story touched your heart even a little bit, please take a moment to like this video. It truly helps this channel grow. If you want more emotional, heartwarming stories like this one, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next one. And if you know someone who needs a little reminder today that kindness always finds its way back around, please share this story with them. Thank you for watching until the very end. It means more to me than you know. I'll see you in the next story.